Because if you say the rule is the best practice we can do in order to integrate environmental biodiversity, soil fertility aspects, if that is the rule, then what is now the rule becomes the exception, which is conventional farming using a lot of pesticides. So the move should be in supporting farmers from what is now the rule to become the rule in a sustainable system. And that means subsidies should be conditioned. So that's very interesting. The new commissioner has said, well, we have a problem with direct payments. The direct payments still have the logic of compensation for something which was many years ago when the EU decided to move from guaranteed prices to direct payments. Guaranteed prices was the Commission intervenes into the market when the prices are too low, buys it up, stocks it, and sells it on the market when the prices come up again. That was abandoned, and I think it was rightly so, because it was a manipulation of the market that wouldn't give farmers a signal of it works or it doesn't work, we can sell or we can't sell. But direct payments to farmers were based on this logic of saying, we compensate you for the loss which you get because we took the guarantee of prices away, and we do it on the basis of historical yields. You know what that means? That means when in East Germany a farm would have 2,000 or 3,000 hectares, which is the case in many places, then the calculation of direct payments would be based on these hectares or on historical yields. And that small farmers that in that time would have had less hectares and less yields would get less. And that is especially so if you compare the old member states and the new member states. The calculation would bring only a third. I think in the case of Estonia it's a third of what the German farmer gets at the moment. So that is an unequal, extremely unequal system, which pushes again those who have the most into more intensive production, and they would be more competitive, and they would still drive out all the small producers out of business. So it's interesting to see the new commissioner coming from Romania, from a country where you still have subsistence production, you still have small farming. Well, he isn't afraid of saying, well, let's be clear, we cannot continue like this. We also have to support small farmers. We also have to put conditions on direct payments. He proposes the following: basic payments to farmers, which is really the very bottom line of support that farmers should get. And they shouldn't get it on a level of historical yields or on the level of hectares. They should get it as a basic payment for everybody. And on top of that, there will be performance linked support. I give you an example. What is being discussed is that we get support as farmers if we do enlarged crop rotation, which include protein crops, for instance. That would lower the need of imports of proteins from third countries. It would improve the soil fertility because protein crops, especially leguminosas, they are fixing nitrogen in the soil, and they will improve also CO2 assimilation. So it has different, very positive effects. And there may be a third level where you really support agricultural systems which are sustainable, and there I would say organic farming is in the best position of getting that. So if that is the case, then we really would move, and if this would really be accepted, that's still not sure, but that's the idea, we would move from organic farming and sustainable systems from being the exception to becoming the rule. That's an interesting move. Secondly, what is being proposed? To take more care of small farmers and family farms. I see Karl Nurm. I mean, he will talk more about family farms and the situation of family farms in Estonia. But that's also a question of employment. That's a question of employment in rural areas. That's a question of what the minister mentioned before. Where is the infrastructure for small family farms to really get to the market? Where are the rules and regulations that allow for local products really to reach the consumers? Where are the links we need in order to really keep the added value in rural areas and not losing people, losing added value, losing infrastructure, which I think was the case, unfortunately, also in Estonia. When I was here for the first time, compared to now, I think you also have lost a lot of people in rural areas. You've lost a lot of infrastructure. It was not just because the EU was saying you have to employ certain hygiene measures and that's why you have to close small slaughterhouses. It was also in the time the belief of the government that it would be a good idea to close down these small entities because they thought, well, we will be more competitive if we make it bigger, if we put it nearer to the cities. What a vision. I mean, that is really bleeding out all the dynamic, it's bleeding out all the possibilities from the rural areas. And then, of course, people will leave the rural areas and they will go to the cities. Well, I think you cannot live also in Estonia on banks. It's beautiful to see so many banks in Tallinn, but that is not the solution. Have you seen the financial crisis? I mean, you have lived through it, but we could get a similar crisis in the agricultural sector. So I believe we have a good chance right now to make it real what the commissioner, what the minister said before, that organic farming is not just a nice thing for people who have money as an exception to pay for healthy food, but also to get a general policy framework in which agriculture can fill up that position. I've seen in the program you will go into all the details of biodiversity loss. You will be discussing family farms. I haven't seen my friend Juhan Sergava yet, but about direct marketing. I think that's a wonderful thing. When I was first in Estonia and he showed me his former state-owned farm and said, well, I'm going to transform that into organic, I thought, my God, how will that work? And it's a success story. And I'm very glad that you have these success stories in Estonia. I personally believe that also the rural movements in Estonia, organized in Kodukant, have been a success story. There may be people saying, well, they have already become too institutionalized, but I mention Kodukant every time on the European scene as an example of self-organization of civil society around a cultural approach, around identity. This is our country, this is where we want to live. We want to stay in our villages, we want to defend our schools. If you hadn't had Kodukant, and if Kodukant hasn't been an offer, not just a criticism to the government, I think the rural areas of Estonia would look very different. So I think we need both. We need a good policy approach, and I think there is good chance that we get into more environmentally friendly direction of agriculture policies, but at the same time we need civil society to organize themselves and to offer to governments to carry the reform. If you don't have that, governments will not change policies, governments will not make the necessary paradigm shift in agriculture and in rural areas. And the last thing, because Alex asked me to talk about it, this second part, organizing civil society in order to carry the reform, we thought it would be very important to do that at an early stage of the reform. You might not be aware that we are already in the middle of the reform of the agriculture policy, which is planned to start in 2013 for the then until 2020. My experience tells me there are every 10 years windows of opportunity which open for a very short time and close. And if you are not able to use that moment to put through your approach, your proposal, and organize yourselves to push for it, you have to wait another 10 years. So what we did on the European level between lots of civil society movements was, let's get prepared for this reform and let's start to discuss what environmental, animal welfare, consumers organizations, farmers organizations, everybody who's concerned with agriculture and rural development want to see change. And if we would be able, and I think we are, we would have then our own European reform project for the CAP. You know, I've been now for 25 years in the European institutions working in mainly this field, agriculture, food, and related issues. And I see that these institutions, if they are not challenged from outside, they just move a little bit. They just move a very little bit towards where the pressure comes from. Mainly it has been the member states saying, well, we would like to save some money here, and so we push it a little bit this way or that way, right? If civil society is not aware what they want, if they don't get organized, if they don't get pushed, and on a European level, you don't make big changes. So there is something called like the Agriculture and Rural Convention, a process which from April to now and will continue has gathered all the proposals from civil society in Europe on CAP reform, and has then, through different drafts, through the internet, through working groups and so on, elaborated a genuine reform proposal, which then was negotiated in UN manner. Have you ever heard of UN manner negotiations? The most boring thing you can imagine. But it was a common text which then was changed in a conference, step by step, in a consensus procedure. So it was then signed by now over, I think, 150 European networks representing, I think, now about 3.5 million people. Well, that's enough. 5 more minutes. Okay. 2 more minutes even. And that is now was presented last week when the Commissioner was presenting his reform project. At the same time, civil society presented its reform project. And that was a really interesting moment, because the Commissioner referred immediately to that as if it was a pillar beside the 3 main institutions. The Commission making the proposals, the Council of Ministers reacting to it, and the Parliament reacted to it. So all of a sudden there was a fourth force, which was this communication of civil society to the European institutions. I am very confident that that will really play a role. I would like to invite you, that's perhaps the only thing we could put on the screen, to have a look at the website of this process. It's called arc2020.eu. And there you can see all the working groups, you see the document and so on. And that's all for the moment. Thank you very much for your attention.